topic that we're discussing at hand is greening the bottom line, financial strategies for sustainable future. It's no longer a debate whether we need to greenline the bottom line or not, but of course, this is something which is a pertinent point because the practicality of it has been really difficult. So today we'll try and decode how do you find practical solutions to greenlining the bottom line. To join me in that conversation, I have Harish Ahuja, the head of Sustainability, Carbon and Power Markets Listing, SSE, National Stock Exchange India. We have Dharnesh, Gordhon, the former CEO at Godrej Consumer and Nestle UAE, and Sameera, Fernandes, Chief Sustainability Officer and Board Member, Century Financial. If I can just invite you on the stage, everyone. Well, yes, the questions which remain the most pertinent and something that everybody wants answers to is the practicality of it. Help me decode that, with respect to the kind of setup that we have at our hand, is it practically even possible to green the bottom line? Why don't you start for us, Harish?
I think it's a very pertinent question. The way I like to start is you have to see the equation, Only if the corporates are doing well, then they do the good. Doing well means they are performing in terms of profitability, And I would say when the doing well is equal to doing good means they are doing consistently well. If you talk about a young SMEs or a young startup to from day one start focusing upon the practicability of applying the ESG practices or applying the sustainable practices, they may not prefer it. But some reasonably mature companies or companies which have been to the business, they somehow demystify the business model from their consumer and from the profitability. I think they will do better in terms of adopting the sustainable practices. And this is very much possible, and many companies are doing it. In fact, many companies are turning around their balance in such a way that their OPEX is becoming CAPEX. I'll talk more about that. But I think most of the good companies which have decoded the profitability mantra are already doing it. And it's very much practically possible. So this is my definitive answer. It's doing it. I'll share more specific later on, yeah.
Sure, but let me toss it to the, former corporate on the panel here, Dharnesh. Is it really practically possible for corporates to go ahead and, green the bottom line and not, letting go of the profitability in that sense?
So my answer is yes. And maybe I'll just step back and talk about absolute practicality. And, if I reflect on me growing up in a city called Durban, in South Africa. And the number of avocado trees, sugar cane, we had all of these things. And we took care of it, right? So always think it all has to start from people, community, then corporate. Corporate has a role in education. Productivity improvements, embracing and implementing technology. So I always think in my own experience especially Nestle's focus on what is called purpose was always about community engagement, because you cannot do anything without community engagement. So somehow I feel that we always come from a different lens, which is let's understand the bottom line. Now the bottom line will happen if we allow communities to uplift themselves, which is improvement agricultural productivity, improving an understanding of how do I protect my neighborhood, my community, my backyard. So the answer is absolutely yes. I really believe it's possible. And I don't want to talk about the 300 years of negative history in a way, when with colonialism, the extraction of the real wealth of the continent was taken out with total disregard for what was left behind. But I see the difference now myself. I've seen it implemented by corporates who believe in it. But it's a long game. It's not, this quarter's results are looking not so good. The analyst will say this. And this is this mindset of an analyst view. And if you don't mind, I'll just reflect on something. Probably one of the most interesting roles I've ever had was to be a CEO of a Nestle listed entity. Now, Nestle doesn't have many external listed entities, so Nestle Nigeria listed on Nigeria Stock Exchange. And it was very interesting. I had a visit from a globally renowned investor, one of the most famous names in the industry, and he came to my office and he says, you don't track the share price. I said, no. If my job is to manage the share price, then I'm not doing justice to the business. So I think that mindset is something that it's very difficult, I understand. The other thing is how you measure. Yesterday's conversation, we talked about measurement metrics, right? It's if I believe that, I need a EBITDA of 17%, which is my global average, when I'm 80% in developed markets, and I'm using the same metrics to measure profitability in this market, which then hinders me from implementing new manufacturing technology, which hinders me from investing in communities. So because of every cent we can squeeze, and then eventually what happens, you reduce marketing spend as well. And then you say, oh, the business is not performing good. So.
Yeah, but just brings me to the next question. Is there something called a first mover disadvantage here for industries to kind of get into it? And is the only way to collaborate together as a group across the industry? Is that the only way? Because otherwise, if let's say Nestle makes a move and the others don't, your profitability will suffer and those analysts will ask you those questions while others will be doing better. So is collaboration the only way forward for this?
So let's talk about plastic waste, right? And one of the things is no single company can do it by themselves. It has to be an industry based. So when you talk about plastic waste, and I know we talk about Africa, but I give you an example about Indonesia. It is such a problem. The world's plastic is landing on the coastlines of Indonesia. But if you want a plastic action committee, it can't be a singular organization. So getting like-minded people together to engage with government, to engage with NGOs, but also to engage with a head office that sits somewhere else in the world, become the most powerful. Because then as a overall industry or industrialists getting together, you can go talk to communities. Because otherwise it's seen as another brand tactic. And you want to avoid this thing of, I'm doing it because it looked cool for my brand. And that's not why you do it.
Fair enough. But one of the major problems has been, of course, the financing part of a lot of these projects as well. So let me get Sameera into the conversation as well. The bulk of the financing so far, and we need a lot of financing for this, is being done by the public sector itself, and the private sector is not really participating. At least that's what the naysayers are saying. Would you concur with that? And secondly, what should we do to make sure that the private sector also lives up to the expectation to that extent?
So I think it's really important that we redefine the narrative of what these green financing options are all about. We talk about greening the bottom line, but are we really doing so is the question. And I think if I may be a bit candid here, to talk about clarity from the government, clarity when you are amidst many regulators, how can we look at standardization? How can we look at advocacy, bringing in the opinions, the challenges of those in the industry to the table, and then having the government play a role in redefining the policies. And I think once it is done, then it is very imperative for the companies and the corporate sector to establish a clear mandate to not just integrate ESG into their offerings, but in every part of the system. We talk about the supply chain, sustainable alignment, we talk about mandating a reduction of carbon emissions. And this shouldn't just be, a roadmap or a vision of the government. And that's where, as you rightly said, the role of partnerships. How can we matchmake? How can we bridge the gap between the private and public sector? And once we get that, I think that is the answer to greening this bottom line.
Yeah, that indeed is the answer. Looks easy, but very difficult to do that. So let me just ask you that, Harish. How would you rate the success of the green financing so far? Do you think it's more glass half full, or is it more glass half empty?
No, I like to answer with glass more full, in fact. I'll not say half full, more full. And I'll share the data here. In fact, let's talk the numbers here. In fact, that will give perspective. Being a realistic, being a marketer from stock market, let's see the number of India per se. So let's say globally. Globally, we are talking about $2.7 trillion year on year till 2050 for net zero. For Europe, we need around $500 billion year on year, again for till 2050. Asia, $500 billion year on year till 2050. And what we are offering COP29, only $300 billion. And that too after 2035. Let's come to India now. India needs around $40 billion year on year till 2030 only for two sectors, transport and power generation, And at this stage, it's good story now coming down. So out of 40 billion, the enormity of task is in last 3 years, average we had done roughly $4 to $5 billion. Now from $4-5 billion to going to 30 billion is a 10x, 6x cost. But now I'm saying why I'm saying that glass is full, because if you see the number of last year, so far this financial year we have raised around roughly $10 billion in equity. And out of that $10 billion, $3.7 billion has been raised by the green companies, solar companies, electric vehicle companies, or companies having some kind of feet into the green hydrogen. $3.7 billion out of $10 billion from public market, 37% coming from the public market, from me and your pocket. It's a good transition. And the second is in debt sector also. In debt, we are around $67 billion. Out of $67 billion, $12 billion has gone to the companies which are to green causes. Again, 17 to 18%. So cumulative, if you see, we are contributing 22% of the capital formation public market going to green causes. There's no shortage of money. And that I'm talking only of India. Now the second thing is what she said. I think most of the countries don't have green taxonomy in place, or they're just copying the Europe, or they're copying the US, because around 93% of green finance is being raised by these two continents. One is Europe, one is America. But in terms of other developing countries, or even China, I take in a developing country, we are raising only 7%. So I think green financing is yet to develop, and very happy to share that India is definitely taking a baby step, but this has become a very giant step in a few years. Now, last but not the least, I think I'd like to answer his question. I think greening the bottom line is a very strategic call one company has to take. And I'll give a very live example, and this example can be copied by many founders sitting over company officials sitting over here. Let's acknowledge three things which are kind of permanent now because of the geopolitical risk, because of this isolation of the trade politics. I think inflation is not going to go away. Your commodity prices are going to go high. So if you see P&L, if you have been CEO, sir, if you see your P&L, interest cost is going to high. Your gross margin is going to shrink. Now, where exactly you can bring the bottom line? You have to see your certain costs which can be transformed into certain other buckets. So let's say electricity cost. Every steel company, cement company, or for that matter, plastic company has around 10 to 12% of electricity cost. Now they are buying the power from fossil fuel or from the coal or thermal. Can you buy it from solar, or can you buy it from wind power? And this OPEX in your P&L, if you buy from your own power plant, or you put up your own captive, this OPEX becomes your CAPEX. Now this CAPEX can be financed from the public market from us. We give the green equity, or you can raise the green debt, green bond. Again, we come to that. And last but not the least, when a company which is not under the cap and trade scheme, when they voluntarily shift their OPEX into CAPEX, which is on for green infrastructure, they get carbon credits. They can sell the carbon credits. So three instruments use just one stroke. Green debt, green equity, and carbon credit project financing. So I think if you use it strategically, becoming green is not only imminent, but at the same time is a very useful choice. So this is my example. Yeah.
Yeah, because if you go by the statistics, energy efficiency over the next few years is expected to save as much as $437 billion and can increase the revenue by 10%, at least by some studies. So definitely there is that merit in doing that. But Dharnesh, yes, go ahead. Yeah.
So, just taking a cue from the discussion is, if you just think about logistics cost across. I used to be fascinated when it was cheaper for a market, I've got to be careful how I phrase, a market in West Africa to import from Europe than to get from your neighbor, or at least one country away. When I was responsible and we should travel to all the markets in West Africa when I was living in Nigeria at the time, we eventually realized it was cheaper to hire a private jet and buy so many hours in a month. I could take the team around from Mali, Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, etc., rather than fly commercial, because it takes you 4 days. And actually the cost. So when you talk about a single truckway, so I think this investment in infrastructure, I know, for example, DP World is doing an incredible investments. It's just mind-blowing for me. They've taken a long view, and I think that will be of great benefit. Now I go to something else, and I'm going to try and be very broad industry-based. If you take how much of turnover is spent on marketing spend, right? On average, a CPG company across, let's say, 40 billion CPG, I'll be very broad because it depends on categories, but $40 billion CPG annual turnover on the continent. On average, 8 to 9% is spent on marketing investment, that is direct consumer communication. So the money is there. Then you talk about trade spend, distributor, incentives, blah, blah, blah. Eventually 14, 15, 18% of your is. So there's money there. It's the willingness to spend, because the challenge I used to have is every time I hire a new brand manager, they want a new campaign. Why? Why you want to change the color of the label? You understand my point? So sometimes we're not understanding. So does it resonate with somebody who lives in a community? If we really understand that, does having greenery around me, does avoiding landslides, does avoiding floods resonate with me, then I'm prepared to buy products from companies who taking it responsibly.
But the problem is there. People realize it, but they're not working towards it. And I think that's the gap. However, the other thing I wanted to check with you, of course, is about the corporate responsibility. Sameera talked about how there's a bit of an ambiguity when it comes to the common market language around it. The governments haven't been very specific around it. But the other problem is lack of demand commitments, right? I mean, I was just talking to a corporate who's managed to develop this green steel, but because it's more expensive than the normal steel, there are no buyers for it. Will having demand commitments also serve that purpose? What's your take?
Yeah, I mean, if I reflect on packaging changes alone that happened many years ago, right? Or I just talk about a supermarket shopping bag. And I remember, like 18, 20 years ago in South Africa, they started charging you for the plastic bag. In the beginning, everyone was freaking out. Everybody was freaking out.
Same here in India.
But today, it is just so, people are just used to it and they actually embrace it. So sometimes you've got to just bang it. I mean, the education as a role, and everybody, I need to engage with you, kumbaya, but eventually sometimes it's just, that's industry's role. Industry's role is to engage with government and say, look, we need this done. We agree it's going to have a cost today, but the benefits are Y. So therefore, we need enforcing of legislation on some of these things. So you've seen that moves happen more in the more developed markets in Africa, for example, and you've seen the positive of that coming through.
No, just that brings me to the next question that I had for Sameera around, the policy action around it, because all the governments are talking about it. We kind of look at every forum and they're talking about the green energy targets that they have, but there's this lack of clarity in the absolute number sense. Till the time you don't know what the destination is in the absolute sense, how do you define a path to it? Do you think that is something also which is missing from the government and the policy making part of things?
I think at the end of the day, it's all about our purpose, be it personal or professional. So I think, if we take a stance on how is it that we would like to redefine the bottom line, let's take an example of IKEA. More than 75% of their transition has happened recently to look at sustainable wood, for example, or sustainable solutions. Let's look at Patagonia, completely into recyclables. Has anyone asked them to do so? Never. What about Orsted? They've moved from fossil fuels to investing high in renewable energy, be it solar winds and, the panels, wind energies and all that. So I think, rather than leaving it to the external, the externals, I think it's time all of us in the room be solutionaries. How in our own way can we contribute towards sustainability, be it in our business, be it in our professional and personal lives? And I think, going back to financing options, we have the green tokenizations. We have the green securitization at the moment, which is coming out. You have the green bonds. You have a lot of models which are coming into place, all centered around credibility. Yes, I think it is time when the private sector gets together to help in establishing these frameworks. For example, Dubai Chambers recently released the ESG label. And I think this is a big transition when you spoke about CSR to ESG to ensure there is complete compliance in every business operation right from the start to the end. And this comprises not just large companies alone, right from your MSMEs to your startups. And just imagine a day when even before you commence operations, you integrate sustainability in all your operations and your financing mechanisms. So I think it is a reality check that we need to put in place to see how is it that businesses operate. And rather than getting clarity from the out, how can we bring in clarity, showcase that to the rest of the world, be pioneers in what we do, lead by example, and then set the new trend.
For example, but Harish, you want to add something?
Yeah, I think I like to compliment Sameera. She made a very important point. But in terms of Indian policy maker regulator, I think we are doing a decent job. I think the world can look towards us here, in fact, because I think when we decided in COP25 that we'll be net zero by 2070, we have a very clear target in terms of NDC, in terms of our power generation from renewable. And you'll be happy to note that as on today, 40% of our power generation coming from renewables, and we are target to achieve around 50% by 2030. And if we add small hydro, we already achieve the target. So my submissions are, India in terms of the policy, in terms of the regulation, the rule book is pitch perfect, which everybody can copy it. I'd like to give some example, then we'll come to the basic questions around. First and foremost, we have got production linkage scheme for advanced battery cell. We have got production linkage scheme for fab to module for solar plant. We have got green transmission line investment in place. In fact, anybody who set up the solar plant across India, they can just connect, plug and play with the green transmission line. We have in place the very much green credit, concept wherein individuals like you and me can save the planet by saving the carbon dioxide, and then we can earn the carbon credits and go and sell in the exchanges. So I think there's a perfect recipe of everything in India. Now coming back to what Sameera is talking about, I like this point. In fact, I think most of the time people are going to sustainable practices, either greening the bottom line or meeting some regulatory directives. So it's more like a top-down approach where regulatory policy makers are pushing them, like buy green steel, something like that, or be conscious towards GHG emissions, or for that matter, your water waste. So it's a top-down approach, or investors are pushing us, like BlackRock or ESG conscious investors are pushing us to go for green. Or third is customer demanding it. But I think this top to bottom and bottoms out, bottoms to top approach may fail. But inners to out, what she talked about, that is inner consciousness, that being a responsible citizen, we have got a responsibility to save this nation, save the continent, globe as a whole. I think if this consciousness of a corporate guy or a founder of individual emanate from inside, I think then I think greening the bottom line will become automatic.
Yeah, because a lot of people right now are greenwashing the bottom line and not really greening the bottom line, and that's the difference because they are forced to do it in one way or the other. But just Harish, add to that point, because how are financial institutions making sure that all the companies that they're investing in are being very serious about sustainability? And I'm not only talking about the green projects for which you get the green financing. Across all lending portfolio, how are they ensuring that? Because you're donned multiple hats, right? From being a bureaucrat to an investor to, of course, a corporate now. How do you think they can go about that, all the financial institutions, to make sure all the people that they're lending to are sustainably conscious entities?
I think it's a very good balancing art. As a financial institution, we understand that multiple companies would not have the priority of greening the bottom line, but making the day-to-day life sustainable. That's why I said doing well is very important to get doing good. Doing well means you are profitable. Now you are adding surplus profits towards making environment sustainable.
You're saying do well first and then do good.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's a balancing act. I think I would not push a startup which is just trying to fix this revenue model, or a technology company just innovating the product to be a green company day one. I think this balancing act is done by every investor, every financial institutions. So we need to be very clear in terms of which company should be pushed for gaining the bottom line, which company should be asked to innovate for the green side. This balancing, I think over a period we understand this. So let me give an example. At this stage, National Stock Exchange, or for that matter, Stock Exchange in India, are pushing the municipal corporation of India, right? So municipal corporation is the third layer of governance. There's a federal government, there's a state government, and the municipalities. In US, it is a $4 trillion market. In US, municipality has raised trillion cumulative. Indian total market cap is around $5.1 trillion. And US alone municipalities, and India, I'm very unhappy to share that only 12 to 15 municipalities have raised less than $100 million. Now, if we ask them to green your bottom line first, is not right. We should first tell them which are the projects you can go for taking the refund. So I think This is a very special criteria, but having said so, there are many companies which need to go to a green side, like steel companies, cement company, petrochemical company. To meet the NDC target, they need to think, because they're mature companies, they are making the profits. How can they put their money in the right side of the law in terms of greening the bottom line? So that way we are trying to balance it, And this challenge is everyday challenge, I think, short term versus long term, what he spoke about. And I think over a period we are learning the tightrope.
That brings me to the next question. This age-old fight, when you talked about nascent versus mature, Dharnesh, the age-old fight has been between emerging countries versus developed countries. How only so-called developed have that kind of on the shoulders to make sure that this is done. And emerging countries always keep talking about that. We need to first kind of come up to the curve, and then perhaps we can talk about all of this. Do you think it's time now that the emerging countries also need to actively participate? Of course, he was talking about how India is doing its bit, but other than that, also not hide or shy away from saying, in the sense, shy behind the fact that they're still kind of working towards the development and take an active call around it.
Yeah, in my own engagements with a lot of government and businesses across West, East, and Southern Africa in particular, it's very interesting discussion. But we're always doing this, right? Number one. Number two, does my audience or my electorate want it in the first place? Which is very interesting. So my usual discussion with them is, the consumer didn't ask for good quality, but companies who implemented good quality practices in their products took market share, gained superiority in the market. Competitive differentiation, if I go, the last 100 years history of CPG companies is always, the better my quality, the better my packaging, the better my efficiencies. So I invest in technology that gave me a superiority in the market, so I know there's certain brands that you will always feel safe to consume, right? It's an education process also. So now imagine, so that's now an entry point. So everybody has good quality. What's next? If it's safe, if it's nutritious, and it has the right ESG practices, now I'm getting to the holy grail of what a great product should be. So I think it is this combination. Nothing can happen on its own. No company, no government. It has to happen together. As long as companies know, whether you're a Swiss-based company or a Mumbai-based company, when you're operating in a market, you belong to that market. You have a responsibility to that community. And I think when you get that sense that you see other companies where they invest 2% of turnover in ESG efforts in this country, but in another country that they operate, they're already zero. So either it's a philosophy, it's a business practice, or it's not. It's like, I can't have great quality practices on one side, but I have the same brand in another market and I have lousy quality practices. So something doesn't work. So the DNA of that organization. So I think more and more consumers and shoppers will start questioning the DNA of an organization. And IKEA is a great example.
Yeah.
And by the way, they become the most accessible price points. So they are touching the touch points of it. It's an amazing business. And it's very interesting. It's like the Apple Watch. The lowest level of income earner to the most highest level will have Apple Watch. IKEA, you'll be surprised how many super rich people go shop at IKEA. So it just shows that it's a great example of what is possible. And it becomes, now what happens is, somebody wants to compete with IKEA. They know these are the benchmarks. I can't do only half. I can't have lousy quality and cheaper pricing, but I don't touch the... So I think the more companies show what's possible, you need a few examples. Like in life, you need a few good leaders to show the way, right? You need organizations to show the way. I think organizations have more power than governments. That's my personal take on it.
I think that makes for a very interesting topic. But just, I'll hand it over to Sameera for any closing comments that you have in terms of which are the new emerging kind of financing tools which are available. Because if I go by the data that has been provided to me, it does seem like that adaptive financing still continues to be a bit underfunded. What do you think more can be done to make sure that there's enough financing available? I know we talked about that there's enough money, but it still seems to be not getting channeled into the right places.
So I think it all boils down, when we talk about adaptive financing, it all boils down to the unbiased investor. What are they looking at in terms of investors and the investment opportunities. And at the end of the day, what is the bottom line amounting to? And for that, we need to retrospect back and ask ourselves one question: what are our priorities? Are we really trying to balance sustainability-led solutions, or are we looking at economic viability? And once we have a clear vision of what our struggling priorities are, it clearly redefines what approach we are going to take in terms of adaptive financing. There are a lot of tools and solutions out there in the market. So much so you have, the angel investor networks, you have like the AVPN, which is a group of investors that we are also part on. And our conscious efforts to look at financing such projects leaves us with one question, which is the vetting process. All these projects look absolutely sincere, credible. But the point is, when we go down deep into evaluating these projects, that is where, it sends out a big world of questions where we do not have the right answers. And I think that is something that I would like to leave as a takeaway for a call to action for all of us. We have sustainable projects and initiatives. We have the funding, global funding from around the world. But the question is, how good is the vetting process to ensure the credibility? And I think that is what the world needs at the moment, to see between the haves and the have-nots, the opportunities that align the bigger interest goals, and see how can we make a difference when we stay true right from the purpose to the implementation, to the execution, and the end result.
Yeah, no, I think that's the key takeaway, because all of you three have talked about the same point in different languages, that it needs to be not top to bottom or bottom to up. It needs to be inside, into out. It needs to be something where you have to lead by example and not wait for the governments and others to take action. And of course, it's about maintaining those ethos and brand value, which stays true across all spectrum, and make sure that you're just providing the best quality that you can do, and then lead by example, as you said. With that, I'll wrap up this conversation. Thanks all of you for making time and being with us here at IGF 2024.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.